In this episode, I'm covering my wish list for the second generation of the ID4, or what I'm calling ID4 2.0. Up front, of course more range and faster charging will always be desired, but these are more specific things I think are reasonable and, in some cases, are already included in the ID4 overseas. The first request are things that can already be found in the European models, which are the heat pump for winter range and performance, as well as the electronically controlled dampers for the suspension. Now, the ID4 suspension is already really solid. I imagine those dampers would make it class leading.
This one is sort of a part A and a part B. Part A is, I'm not in love with the default rear view camera on the ID4 because anything that's not directly behind your line of sight starts to become really distorted. As you see that car right there, it doesn't look like that in real life, of course. And as you start backing up, cars look like they're hitting your ID4 when they're actually still 6+ inches away. So I think there's two parts here. One, the ID4 probably should have a better default backup camera that's a little bit more accurate in terms of what's going on.
Part 2 here is I'd love to have this wide view camera as my default, maybe saved to some sort of driver profile. That way my settings are saved for me and I don't have to go in here and switch this manually each time I drive the car.
I'd like to talk about just the buttons in this car in general. So I think VW went sort of the middle ground between all touch buttons and all physical buttons. And I don't think that doing that middle ground ended up being the best experience, because what happens is, let's say if you're driving down the highway and you want to turn the climate on, there's nothing to physically touch necessarily, and oftentimes I'll end up hitting the P menu button, and so it will show up the parking sensors or the rear view camera while I'm driving, things like that. And it's a little frustrating because there's no real way to feel anything here. You actually take your eyes off the road and come down here to look. And moving over to the steering wheel, the same thing can be said. This is a little better because there's little crevices here in the actual buttons, so you can kind of feel around where you're supposed to be touching for whatever action you're trying to take. And for me, I think something like having the volume knobs and having the climate control knobs down here at the bottom that are separate physical buttons, I think would probably be the best way to do it. And then everything else, maybe you put on the screen or over here on the steering wheel itself, you can kind of make these more physical buttons and less touch. I've noticed that especially the gloss plastic here and the silver trim that goes all the way across the dash, there can be a reflection of light off of that right into the driver's eyes and right into the passenger's eyes. And my girlfriend constantly complains when we're on road trips and the sun shines directly in her face that she gets headaches and things. So in the future, I'd like to see if VW would make this more of a matte finish of some sort that's anti-reflective, as well as with this silver piece right here going across the dash. I'd love to see that be more of a matte type finish that again has anti-reflective properties. I think that would be super helpful for comfort, especially for people who live in really sunny places. Again, going with that same theme of having less gloss black and having less reflective materials, I would love to see this be more of a matte finish, sort of how Tesla updated their center console from being a really shiny gloss black to being a matte finish as well. One thing you'll hear ID4 owners complain a lot about is the lagginess of the infotainment system, and I'm no exception to that. Once it gets warmed up, it runs perfectly fine, but typically in the mornings when you're first getting out to the car and it's sort of setting itself up, there's typically a lag, for example, on getting to different vehicle menu functions. I think infotainment systems are going to be more part of the shopping journey for different buyers as the technology evolves and gets more useful. And I would like to see VW invest in some real horsepower. For example, Tesla just updated its entire lineup, including the Model 3 and Y, with an AMD Ryzen chip just last week. Now this chip carries some real horsepower to it. It's supposed to be as strong as a PS5. Now why would you want that? It's for processing power going through different applications. It's for full self-driving for those guys. We'll see how VW sort of takes that on in the future. I think that your infotainment system needs to be as responsive as your desktop, as responsive as your iPad. It needs to immediately respond when you touch different functions. A lot of electric vehicles offer one-pedal driving, which is you can literally drive the car without ever using the brake pedal, assuming that you anticipate your braking distance well enough. Unfortunately, the ID4 does not offer this, but as of today, I want to demonstrate to you, in case you are unaware, of what it looks like to drive the ID4 when you do have the regenerative braking mode on, which is B mode. So what happens with the ID4 is you're driving down the street and you take your foot off the accelerator pedal and the car will slow down semi-aggressively, although definitely not the most aggressive in the industry. And as you see, my foot's off the accelerator pedal and we're still moving at approximately 2 to 3 miles per hour. And it will just continue to move unless I put my foot on the brake and hold the car myself. Personally, I'm a really big fan of one pedal driving, so I would love to see VW in the future make the ID4 a complete, true one pedal driving vehicle.